Welcome, everyone, to the Friday morning live stream, also Bridges of Meaning question and answer. This Monday, I released a video about the marriage crisis, failure of the intergenerational handoff. And for the next 2 weeks, on Fridays, in our normal slot in the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, we're going to be discussing this issue. We're going to do it in some different formats. We're going to do some question and answer. We're going to do some panel discussion. And so this is the first of those two things. Now, helping me do this is Valerie. Valerie's been on the Discord server quite a while. So thank you, Valerie, for doing a lot of the arranging and setting this up.
Sure.
And let's see, Valerie, who are our panelists this morning? Are they in the room already?
I think we have two of the three. I have my backup as well. Okay. So we've got Jimmy D of Thing, we've got Birdie, and let me see. I don't see Michael, so Christian, we're going to pull you in for the discussion.
Looks like Michael's here.
Oh, Michael's here?
Yeah, Michael's here.
Okay, cool. We'll go with Michael. Thank you for being on standby, Kristen. So maybe what we could do, if it's okay with you, Paul, is we'll have each one introduce themselves, just a brief introduction.
That sounds great.
Okay, great. Why don't we start with Jimmy?
Hi, I'm Jimmy. I've been kind of a ghost on here for a while, but I've started to be more active. I used to be an administrator on the IDW Discord server. I've kind of parted ways with them. My journey has been, I was born to a father who was Orthodox and a mother who's Catholic. I was raised Catholic, but my father did more of my teaching. So it resonates with me in a certain kind of way. And I kind of went on my own and then couldn't ever really become an atheist. I couldn't, it just didn't speak to me. And then as life became more complicated, it became clear why that was. And then for years, I was actually in a Gnostic group. I was initiated and everything. And then I realized that path also was not for me, that it was headed in a way that I couldn't follow. And now I'm trying to rediscover what I think are my Orthodox roots.
Okay, thank you. And this particular topic, Jimmy, why does this topic interest you?
I am 30. I'm about to turn 36. I think I've met the person I'm going to marry. We both believe that, but that's in my mind a little old. And I have experienced many things in dating that have made me very. It's hard not to become fatalistic in modern dating. Yeah. That's why I'm interested. And I'm also, I really love talking about the feminine and the masculine, to many's disappointment.
All right. Thank you, Jimmy. Go ahead, Val. Who's our next panelist?
How about Michael C., if you would be kind enough to give us a little introduction and your interest in the topic.
Yeah, sure. Just a mic check first. Am I coming through okay?
Yep, we hear you fine.
Okay. So I am a good friend of Rod Huggins, who's a mutual friend with Paul. And so that's how I got connected up with this Discord. I'm here in Tucson, Arizona. I'm actually at the church building so that I give my family space so that I'm not talking about spicy things in the background of school and court meetings and stuff. I'm married. I have an adopted daughter who's 18. Like I said, I'm a close part of this very close-knit church community in Tucson, Arizona. I work as a academic tutor, mostly for boys who are at the tail end of a drug treatment program who are working on their high school diplomas. And that's probably a good place to stop it for now.
Okay. And well, why your interest in this subject?
Well, because I'm a guy, I'm interested in sex. I'm married. Also, actually, so I got, at the same time I got hooked up with Paul. I got hooked up with a Jordan Peterson meetup group in the local area. Almost all of them are single guys.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing the dilemmas of the dating world renewed, even though I'm not one of them. And I have a lot of sympathy for that. And it seems like there is kind of a, I don't know, impending crisis, as Paul was calling it, the marriage crisis. I feel like there's going to be there already are a lot of really unhappy people, but it feels like there are some structural things socially that are pushing us towards a lot of really unhappy people who are going to be very angry very soon.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Well, how old were you when you married?
I am going on 10 years of marriage, so I'm just about 40. I was just shy of 39 when I got married.
Okay.
I mean, sorry, 29.
Okay. All right. Very good. Who's
and
next?
Next we have Ferdy or Ferdy. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name.
Well, I listen to all of it. So, but my name is Ferdy. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm 31. I'm kind of in the same situation as Jimmy. I'm in a relationship and trying to work towards marriage and eventually fulfilling the possibility of what marriage can entail to its completeness. And my interest in this topic is mainly, I guess, exploring that and trying to speak it out outside of the relationship itself as well, to test it and to learn more about it. And I've seen a lot of discussions going on in regards to relationships and marriage, but also in regards to relationships in friendships or community. And I think those are all linked and have the same basis. So I'm curious to explore it.
Great. Thank you, Ferdy. Ferdy's a pretty well-known guy here on the Discord server. And our fourth, Val?
Hi, I'm Valerie. I'm a writer and a lifelong learner. I've been a member of the Discord and following Paul for quite a few years. I have a different perspective than most people. I'm in my mid-40s. I'm single. I don't date. And I figured I might have some two cents to throw in periodically from here or there. But I mostly wanted to listen and help facilitate the conversation if I could.
Well, thank you, Val. And if you go back in the archives of the Friday morning questions and answers, I often had Val read questions for me. So really appreciate your presence here in the Discord community, Val, and your willingness to show some leadership in this conversation. Well, who wants to? Well, what do you think, Val? Should we start with the questions and answers first, or unless?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, how about we start with what each guy wanted to talk about, and then go to the question. Is that okay?
Sure.
So maybe we'll pick on Jimmy since we have him going first. What were your thoughts on this topic that you'd like to share?
So I guess I had to do a lot of self-discovery and realize what in myself was in the way of me making progress in this area of my life. And as I worked on that, I also started to realize how many hurdles there are today. Like, I'm sure there have always been hurdles, but it feels today like there are 7 layers of abstraction between what we claim to want and yeah. So I guess I had to do a lot of self-discovery and realize what in myself was in the way of me making progress.
It feels like we're getting some feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear myself. That's why I stopped.
In radio days, it said, turn your radio down when you're actually on the phone call. I don't know if it was you or someone else, but everyone else in the room should have their mics muted.
Is it me?
No, it was someone else.
If you're watching on YouTube or something, yeah, that's probably what's going on in the background.
Yeah.
I don't have it on. Interesting. Okay. Well, hopefully it doesn't happen again. So I guess I've tried. I think it explains why I was so into the IDW. Is I was trying to operate within the space that most people are in a way that pulls towards something that I think is a better solution. And there's a lot that you have to learn the language of where you are, or like what the world actually is today. And I had talked about this in general a little while ago about how I think I've been striving for something that I think of as secular ecumenism, which is, it sounds like a nonsensical term, but I think I have some kind of faith that everybody can realize that they have faith, and it could open the door to things. But I have been confronted with that quite a bit. And like, for example, if you even try to suggest there is a problem with intimacy, like not necessarily sex, even just intimacy, it's like you're in the Matrix and they realized you're not supposed to be here. I don't know if that makes any sense. And
can you flesh that out or give an example?
So I think that we have a schizophrenic relationship with a million things, and intimacy is one of them. And an example I'll give is so if you're using a dating app, you can get this weird kind of intimacy from the texting because there's no risk involved. You can just decide that person knows too much, and they usually do. It's not healthy. It's like we know we need that intimacy, but we think we can compartmentalize it and sort of get it where we want it, and then just be like, okay, I don't need that anymore. But it's not a fruitful tree. It doesn't do anything for you. And if you kind of try to talk about that on a date, because for me, I learned a while ago that I have to just set myself up and like, clearly this is where I stand, and this is what I'm looking for, and I think this is important. And that was one of them, is just, I realized, okay, I'm not going to talk to you on this app for very much. Like, yeah, I'd like to meet you. That's it. I don't want to do any more than that. And that you can be really, sometimes people will only go on the date with you because it's mysterious, and then they're so focused on that, and I can't really explain it. It's just, it's like you stand out because you're not going along with the script.
It's, we talked on the Monday discussion a lot about the apps, because that's when I was before I was married, there was no such thing as apps. There were no smartphones. It's really interesting the way that this technology is. We really don't understand the way this technology is impacting us and the depths that it is. And so I think your story is very interesting in that, especially when you talked about, we know that intimacy and compartmentalizing, there's those two things. That the power of intimacy is that it isn't compartmentalized. And so right there you have this collision between two opposites. I thought that's very interesting.
Yeah, and I think you actually, like, when you're confronted with real intimacy, meaning I'm connecting with a person, revealing things about myself, and they're doing the same to whatever degree is healthy for that moment, I find that people are terrified of it. They don't know what to do. And like, honestly, I get it, because it should be a little scary. I think it should be it should take it seriously, but it seems like, and I think I'm guilty of it. That's in points in my life too, to be honest. But I just think that sort of, well, I know I want intimacy, or I need intimacy even. Maybe I'm aware of that, but I really don't want to pay the cost of it, which is that it's scary.
Yeah, that's always the deal with intimacy. It's, we need it, we don't want to pay for it, and so much of what we have developed appears to be the opportunity of having it without paying for it, but then there are other things to be paid. It's just a classic human condition.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I think that you can see that in a million places. I want it. I need it. I don't really want to, I don't even want to talk about the cost of it. I don't, that itself is too much.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anything else before we go to the next?
Well,
Um,
I could probably put on top of that what Jimmy was saying.
yeah, go for it.
For my interest, because I also think one of the interesting things about that is the appeal, the beauty of it itself is being tainted nowadays. So people are not willing to walk that dangerous path. So we have too much focus on the dangers of it, and there's too much ice cream.
say
So
say more about that, Ferdy. Too much ice cream.
well, it's nowadays. Well, we see it in many different ways, not just with relationships. We're building connection to each other. Like to build connection, you need to open yourself up. Like that's probably the best way to express you love somebody is to open yourself up more and more by each day. And that's a scary thing, as Jimmy was saying. But nowadays, often that feeling of intimacy that you need and feel eager to, you can fulfill that daily by dosing yourself with different methods, which are not sustainable or long lasting. But every day you can take them and they are not dangerous. Like it's, you're going into a chat room with people with like a streamer who's streaming for thousands of people. You get that little hit of like saying the same thing as the rest of the chat at the same time.
Yeah.
And it brings you that community, that intimacy hit that you need. So you don't feel like, the need to move out into the world.
Yeah.
But then probably every evening you're laying in bed and you can't sleep because you feel like you screwed up today again because you didn't do the things you wanted to do. But the next day you just fall in the same trap and you just keep feeding every day on ice cream. So how can we point to enough beauty in relationship and marriages without disregarding the dangers of it so that people are willing to move that path?
Can I ask a question? I'm curious if you feel how have felt similarly that there's also a fear of how much it could be just gone. Like divorce is a serious problem, and it's, I mean, kind of common now. And if you've been in a long-term relationship where you've had any kind of anything built, but you didn't get married, probably because you were afraid of the same things, and then it's gone, and it can feel like, what is the point? So I kind of, one of the things I did for myself was I just decided I need to know what marriage is. I need to understand that, and I need to know what it is instead of just something that ends in divorce. Oh, there's the echo again.
Jake, okay.
I got it. So I kind of decided that if I get married, and I want to get married, it's a goal, and I'm going to be scared of it, but I'm going to do it. But I'm also going to say, I am not going to get divorced. Like, unless it's some extreme reason, I'm not getting divorced. And I kind of changed my definition of marriage to be, in my mind, if you get divorced, you weren't in a marriage, because marriage is under God until death do you part. So that wasn't a marriage.
Well, that's already an interesting point, right? Because then we're talking about like what marriage eventually entails. Because, well, I'm having always difficulty with accepting marriage is just the point that you get wed. Like I would say, marriage is a continuous process till the full union of one, and that already starts before being wed. I think you can often find yourself already in marriage without having the wedding performed. So I think it's an extremely important part of marriage.
I think that's part of what Jimmy was saying, and part of what I've seen is people who are afraid of divorce, And so let's say they live together, or they just have these sequence of intimate relationships where they are in many ways acting as intimates, and then it breaks down. And while they're never filing papers, and while they'll never have a tag on them that says divorced, they've been through how many divorces? And, and I think that's Jimmy. I heard some of that in your answer. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think I kind of conceptualize marriage as an announcement of intention and attention to God and before your community. And so I agree that there's something to building marriage before you're even wed, but the difference to me is you need to be aware of when it gets to that point, and you need to say it and like commit to it. And that's really terrifying today because there's too much ice cream and it's too cheap.
Yeah, and then the moving beyond, like what after the wedding? Where do you head to? How do you keep paying attention to that point?
Michael C. Any place you'd like to begin this conversation with?
Well, I heard Jimmy say that he doesn't quite know what marriage is from a Christian or theistic standpoint, but then I heard him articulate it really well. So I guess a little 2 cents there is that he maybe knows what marriage is already more than maybe he realizes. And then we got a little bit into the importance of community for marriage. Well, we just recently had a baptism at the church, and it's not all that different from the way that you might do a marriage ceremony in a church. And part of the point of having a ceremony is to bring your surrounding community into the marriage commitment. Not that they're part of the inside of the marriage exactly, but they're part of holding the two people up and helping to keep them married, hopefully not in a forceful or coercive way, but to support them, encourage them, give them advice, lend a hand in all the different ways that marriage can be really difficult or go wrong.
I think that's good.
Yeah, and the other thing I've been thinking about with dating apps and things is that it's made this really expansive, globalized sexual marketplace, and that's a nightmare to deal with for any commodity. And then if you commodify sex that way, and a lot of people just straight up commodify, just go straight into sex with that. But I mean, you can do the same thing to dating or all the other things that are sexual, but not necessarily straight up sex. Everything around sex and dating there. And there's got to be ways to shrink the market or, make it less of a market, make it less of a commodities market in order for healthy sex and dating to occur. And then from my perspective as a Christian, healthy sex is within the context of an extremely committed relationship. That's marriage ideally, but leading towards marriage a little less ideally.
Any comments on some of Michael's thought from the panel?
It hit me, the community thing, because that's been the most painful thing for me for the last year. For COVID is this complete break. The community was breaking down to begin with, but it feels like it's on its last breath, and I really do agree that's a really important part, that you have a community, that you know what that is, and that you're all similarly oriented so that you can support each other.
One of the things go ahead, Michael.
Well, I just got a text that said, "Can you elaborate on that point?" But just to give a little feedback back to that, which point? Because I made like several points. The So, and then go ahead, Paul, while I'm getting.
Well, I think the community point is fundamental, and I've said a number of times, the way it's looking, marriage is only going to last in either deeply religious communities or for the very wealthy, and the two motivations are quite separate. But the I mean the community piece, I who somebody said here in their introduction the structural issues involved, and I think that's right. And when we're looking at structural issues involved, many of those structural issues involved have to do with community. And I made the point a number of times on the question and answer that in the 1980s, when I was in my 20s, I lived within a community where there were norms and expectations, and they were not tyrannically enforced. They were subtly socially enforced, and a lot of often that enforcement. I mean, part of what Peterson brought to the table is connecting up status with emotional mood regulation, and so you lose status. You'd lose status in a community for violating the norms. You gain status in a community for sort of heroically maintaining the norms. And if the norms are healthy and good, that helps people achieve what they haven't had the biological age to accumulate the wisdom necessary for that sort of achievement. That's what healthy culture does. And despite all of the difficulties, I mean, there's just there's so many pitfalls and disappointments and failed expectations in these stories, and there always have been. Part of what has shifted is we've sort of exchanged a degree of community enforcement and reinforcement for a sort of absolute freedom, and now we're paying the price for that freedom because we realize that human beings require community for there to be wisdom, and for that wisdom to be able to be deployed, usually not in an overt conscious way, but in the much more subtle communal reinforcement ways. So
I really struggle with this community thing because I sometimes feel homeless in that aspect, because my more secular friends, there is a sense of community there. There's some things there that are communal, but it's like if you even look at it, it goes away. If you even notice it and mention it, it's like the fear of it not being a purely individual thing is really terrifying, and it goes away. But then at the same time, I got First Communion and everything at the Catholic Church, so I had that, and I've experienced the Orthodox Church, and then I was a Gnostic for years, and there was a really intense sense of community there. So it's hard because you go to these communities and you want to be like, you see something and like you want to lift it up, like you want to say, look, that's such a, look at this community, and then the second you do, it runs away.
Well, I think your point is also excellent in that, I mean, street gangs work on community. That's the power that they leverage. Cults work on community. That's the power that they leverage. Just because there is community doesn't mean that the community is pointing towards the right thing or arranged according to the correct stars. And so another thing that I thought of when you talked about homelessness, part of John Vervaeke's point in terms of the meaning crisis is this domicide, where part of what has happened is that we have lost a sense of home, and not housing but home. So excellent points. Thank you. Michael, did you get a response on that text and the clarification for what someone wanted to know?
No, so I'm going to guess that they were wanting you to expand, or all of us to expand on community involvement. But I was thinking and I've heard this from other people, but I was thinking like another way to explain my point about the sexualized global marketplace, or the marketplace globalized for sex, is the difference between what you might imagine people lived in, I don't know, 300 years ago versus now, where you would be in a small village, most likely, or maybe a group of farmers and their families within a few miles radius or something like that. And so your options for who to potentially pair up with are pretty limited. And so you make your determinations on a finite set that you can conceptualize and even know really well, all your options. And then you can pick your best option accordingly within a group of, I don't know, 5 to 7, which seems to be like the optimal number that humans can deal with. And now with the internet, dating apps, and all this other technologically mediated ways that we can engage the world, there's an overwhelming number of options. And so you can get your immediate kind of more shallow needs met for like instantaneous sex through Tinder. But even that spiraled out of control to the point where it doesn't work for most people most of the time. But there was a time when it really did work to get your most basic sexual, craving met immediately. But then as far as long-term partners, you're constantly in the grass could be greener on the other side kind of thinking, like you're constantly comparing. Everyone's always got like one foot out the door because there's always somebody better that they might be able to get. And there's always comparisons between the person that you have in front of you and the person that you maybe could get a few text messages away.
And I would imagine once you have met a person via the app, James in the Monday conversation noted that what you have in an app is you pick the best profile. I mean, I've never used a dating app, but you pick, I would imagine, like if it's like Facebook or Twitter or anything, or Instagram, you pick the best picture you can and you add filters and you edit it, and so it just makes sense that you pick the most alluring picture you can. Now you're sitting across the table from the real person. Now you're having a conversation, and in the process of that conversation, even though, as is usual in terms of the beginning of a romantic relationship, you're projecting madly upon that other person so that they barely peek through. But that person then has to compete with how many other tailored, edited, filtered profile pictures all throughout Tinder. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, that's perfectly. Yeah, go ahead, Jimmy.
Sorry, I just wanted to say I think that's particularly worse for women because guys don't do it as much. There's almost like a meme of like guys on dating apps are just holding their fish that they caught. That's the meme. Guys are sharing some kind of accomplishment. And also, I've noticed there is a bias against selfies with men. Women don't like it when guys have pictures they took of themselves. So, in a way, there is a pushback that says, like, you need to have other people taking pictures of you. You need to be doing things with people that they take pictures of you. But with women, guys don't care. Guys do not care. We just want to see what we want to see.
Guys are so stupid simple.
Yeah, there's also a responsibility to the people participating, right? Like it's also how you participate on those platforms if you are going to. Like the domicide is basically you're living with a mask that you already should have disregarded. Like you should have let a part die of you that you're still clinging on. That's when domicide happens. Like if you want to feel at home, you have to put that mask away and present yourself openly and try to find connections to the communities or yourself or your relationship. And that's also with community. You can't depend on one community. You need multiple communities. And I have, for example, a couple of friends, we just talk football, we play cards, just have fun. And sometimes something interesting or like something more serious or deep comes up. But at the same time, I know if something goes all wrong, they will be standing there. And I don't need anything else from them. I can find that in other places. So it's also like, it's kind of how you navigate yourself in those places. And I think that's what, for example, the relationship is so important, because it's probably the most necessary place to put your mask away, because you can't stay in a relationship one-on-one with a mask on. So you have to chip it away every time a little bit, open yourself a little bit more.
Can I expand on that? Because that's very. In 2018, I was traveling, and I was in Edinburgh, and I was talking to these guys in my hostel, young guys. I was part of a conversation, and I was just drifting in thought, and I just started talking about masks and how we got to take them off. And I was shocked that these young guys, like young 20s, were just obsessed, and they were like, "You need to tell us more about this. You need to tell." And so I started to try to think about it, and then so it was on my mind, to the point where this one kid was actually messaging me from Australia after he got home and I was home. And then I went to Dublin after that, and the same thing happened. So then I thought, I really need to think about what this means. And I wrote it down, and I did share it in general the other day, that I titled it Masks and Marriage. And the sort of TLDR is, marriage is you kind of have to put masks on to interact with society, because you're a monster. You're like, you have to learn how to get along with people by suppressing certain parts of yourself, because it's not appropriate. But then you come to that place where you need someone to know who you are, and I think that's what marriage is. I'm going to try my best to show you everything, and I'm going to trust you, and you're going to do the same.
Yeah. Once again, Jimmy, I think you're nailing what marriage is, at least in my opinion. Doesn't seem like you're behind the 8 ball as far as figuring it out.
I think part of the difficulty we have is, I've mentioned this before, in Spanish, for example, there's 2 words that we use know for. There's saber, which is to sort of know and be able to articulate, and there's conocer, which is to be in the middle of it and to know it experientially. So, and I when I hear Jimmy say, "Well, I know, but I don't know," and I think that's just the 2 senses of to know in that sense. So, no, I agree. I agree with Michael, Jimmy. You're really articulating quite well what marriage is about.
That makes me feel more confident in what I'm going to do this year.
Well, you'll screw it up, don't worry. But you'll learn that conocer type knowledge before you know it. So good for you.
But I think the allowance of openness then within the marriage is just like one of the steps, right? Because then you start noticing beauty in the other, but also beauty in yourself. And so you find some truth that's true and goodness that's good from the other. So you find appreciation and you find forgiveness for aspects within both of each other. And through that, if you embody that into yourself, you find more love. So you become more love, which allows more openness again. So then you're like in an upward cycle of connecting to each other more and more, becoming one.
All right, Ferdy, you're up. What introductory comments from you, or anything you'd like to talk about a little bit more, or at least set on the table?
Well, I didn't really prepare anything for this. But we've been talking about it mainly. What I was like focusing on is more like the spirit of it all.
Okay.
Because I think often we can already, the goal of marriage, or where it heads to, can also be achieved as a single person.
All right.
But you need all these spirits and coming together, and these, well, not laws or practices, but you need to pay attention to how you navigate it to become one, to be with God. And you can do that. You can do it as a single person, I guess, because we see that. And well, I think me as non-Christian, but many Christians here, they look up to Jesus, who did that. And he didn't get married.
Yeah.
But we see a lot of practices, right, with monks and priest.
And probably a discussion for a further one will be the internal tensions within Christianity surrounding marriage itself. That is a huge topic because, of course, Jesus, to the best of our knowledge, was single. The Apostle Paul, to the best of our knowledge, was single. Has something to say in 1 Corinthians 7 about marriage. Roman Catholic traditions, and I assume Orthodox traditions as well, have had monasteries of single people. Marriage really, in Protestantism, it takes a big turn. Marriage becomes the little church, and so there's that itself is a huge conversation that we'll have to have another day, and maybe I'll put a panel together for a video, a Zoom conversation at some point for it. So thanks, Ferdy.
Mm-hmm.
Valerie, Valerie.
I was going to say,
yeah,
sorry. We could probably address it, in a small piece today, but then I'm talking over Valerie's time. So let me turn that over to her.
Okay, Val, you were, I really appreciate the leadership that you showed in putting this panel together. And one person in the YouTube comment said, only one single lady in the group? So we don't have a lot of ladies in the Bridges of Meaning Discord server. It's a very guy space, but I've noticed many times the women are the women are real leaders in this community. So why you're interested in this, Val? I mean, you jumped on this almost right away. So tell us more.
I have personal interest in it from being single and not dating. I guess personally, I would like to be in a romantic relationship, but I just never pursued it because I was kind of not really crazy about the cultural perspective of dating, of everything having to be physical. And I was like, I never really was aware of the purity culture till much later in my life, but I was kind of like, I'd rather wait. So it was something of my own choosing that I kind of chose, and I just kind of been skittish about dating and the culture, everybody hooking up and all that just made me feel uncomfortable. But I'm kind of sensitive to people who might be older, in their 30s and 40s who are single and wondering if they'll ever find someone. I'm kind of in the same boat as them.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm okay if it doesn't happen. I've got my family, I got my friends. So I'm doing a lot better than a lot of people who actually live on their own. But I just thought another voice would be helpful of someone actually being over the 30-year-old thing where you're still single, you don't have any prospects, and you don't know what the future is going to hold. A lot can happen in 5 or 10 or 20 years.
Yep.
You don't know what's going to happen. I have one friend who met the love of her life, and she's going to have a baby soon. But many of the young ladies that I know who are in their 30s are still waiting.
Yeah.
And they're looking for love, and they're trying to find someone. And I see in the Discord server talking about, from a man's perspective and from a woman's perspective, how there's this large group of people that they can't connect with that would not be a good partner or girlfriend or boyfriend or all this kind of stuff, and it tends to be like certain criteria of people who are they're looking but they're not finding the right match, and unless someone wants to go for just the hookup or the sex or something. And I just thought, I feel empathy and pity for them because I know what it's like to not be surrounded by other miserable guys that you're on the same wavelength with. I have a group of friends that we're all on different perspectives. I'm probably the lone conservative out of the group of more liberal-minded friends. And there's a couple single guys, but I wouldn't, they're nice guys, not in the typical, pick up whatever the the red pill or whatever the heck it's called. But they're genuinely good people. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't want to have a romantic relationship with them. Not to disparage them at all.
Yeah.
And I'd like to be on, a couple foundational footings with somebody on the same page. And I just haven't found that.
Yeah.
And I haven't really honestly looked in the dating websites, because every time I look at it, it feels like I'm shopping for someone. And it makes me feel kind of queasy. And I end up gravitating to guys that are more liberal than I am, and I'm like, I have all these liberal friends. I don't need a liberal guy, and the irony will be probably I end up, going out with a liberal guy. Who knows what the future holds?
Yeah.
But I feel sympathy for people who are going through it's a reality instead of a theoretical. Mm-hmm. Theoretical is interesting. I really enjoyed your conversation with the panelists that you did on marriage crisis. That was fascinating. I think there's a lot more single people than I realized when I saw Joey and Cassidy talking. I thought there's more people like that out there that feel like they're the oddballs when actually maybe just like the nuns are on the rise, maybe the single things is on the rise. And I don't think people want to be single.
Yeah.
I think they want to find somebody, and they just can't find them. Like your wife was talking with a group of ladies who are in their 30s, and they're looking for a guy. I have a group of friends in their 30s who are looking for a guy, and they just can't find them. I think it's just trying to find someone that you're compatible with, and actually the elusive spark, whatever that might be. Some people want to just like settle down with someone that you have, you're on the same page with, whether it's religion and politics or some mix of that, or find someone that you have the spark with and that you can work at and has the character traits that you can actually have a long-term relationship with.
Yeah.
So those are some of my thoughts.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Val.
Sure.
And it's interesting to me just the language, because we sort of say, well, can't find, and that sort of becomes stylistic to there's actually quite a sophisticated cluster of dynamics that are involved, and I think you touched on them. There's compatibility. I mean, the spark is sort of what puts us over the puts us over, helps us to charge over the hill of all of the fears and quite reasonable hesitations that we have with someone, and the other person has to have it. So yeah, I think you're very right. This is a lot of, I think we have more people today who are probably not married and not in a committed, stable, long-term relationship. And yeah, and then if you look at, say, part of the reasons the panda is so endangered, and the Chinese, of course, have figured this out, is that for the panda to actually reproduce in captivity is enormously hard. And so, the Chinese, who are trying to keep the panda from going extinct, go to astounding lengths to figure out all of the little subtleties to help the panda continue the promotion of the species. Human beings are on one hand really weird in that we're sort of, we reproduce fairly easily biologically, but we've got such a stack of other layers that to actually accomplish our goals, to pursue what we think we should do, well, that's quite a bit more challenging. So I really appreciate your testimony here, Val, because this is something that I think that's part of the reason we're doing this whole thing. Anybody listening to Val wanna have any comments or connections in terms of what she said? I mean, a couple of you, a couple of us are married, and some of you are about to be married. But what's your perspective?
Well,
I wanted to. Sorry, go ahead. I've talked a lot. Go ahead.
oh no, I was just like, I probably talked to the most optimistic guy here on the Discord before, a little bit about this. And basically it came to be like, well, it's on both sides. The only issue is like, it's difficult to find each other or to show somebody that there's more to a relationship than that first date where you're talking about a little chit chat. So how do you either connect people who are already serious about it in the mingle moods of people who haven't really thought about it, or how do you start being able to show it to people so they can start participating in it and see if they're willing to enter like a more serious relationship? There's fish on both sides.
That's true.
Yeah, the Dutch have a way with sayings. There's fish on both sides.
I wanted to connect to the concern over. I guess it's not concern, but hyper liberal spaces, because I most of my friends are musicians. I live in a very, very progressive pocket of New York. It's really hard sometimes to hear things and not speak, because it's not going to be a good thing or be helpful. And I guess one thing I would say is try not to mistake what's not said for what's not believed, because a lot of people, I think, are just not saying things. And then also, I do think that divide can be crossed, because I don't even consider myself really a conservative. I don't think I can align with today's liberals, but my girlfriend is very liberal. She's it's an interesting match, actually, because she was raised Jehovah's Witness and escaped a very tough situation when in her teens and had nothing and no one, and then found a support network with a family that was Catholic and tolerated her atheism. And then that kind of fell apart too, because she died. And then now she is where she is, and she says she's an atheist, and she laughs, but I tell her, you're not an atheist, and she just says that's what her mom, like her adopted mom, would have said. And I think that what I'm trying to say is there's definitely a barrier with secularism and political divides, but I think they can be crossed. I have faith that they can be crossed anyway. There has to be an amount of overlap, I think. If I couldn't, I've said to my girlfriend many times, I was like, this is like, if I couldn't express this to you, if you didn't understand this, if we weren't on the same page on these things, then this isn't going to work, and we shouldn't waste anybody's time. I said, I'm getting married in a church. I don't understand what marriage is outside of a church. It doesn't make sense to me. And even though she has a kind of secular perspective that I honestly kind of understand, given what she went through as a child, if you're patient, you can find the thing in there that can hear what you're saying. So I guess I'm just trying to say, try not to lose faith, because even though it seems like everybody has left God and behind and is self-assured in their politics, I don't think it's actually true.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking about lists while you were talking, Jimmy. So my experience in looking at the world in general is that men tend to have very, very short lists or no lists at all, whereas women have really, really long lists, extremely long lists of things that they need to have in their prospective dating partner, eventually marriage partner. But I actually think lists are a good idea. There's got to be some kind of balance between no list and list miles long. It seems like you would want essential values that really, really are truly deal breakers, and to keep that as short as possible. So So interestingly, I did have a very objective written down list. It probably exists somewhere on the internet somewhere, because nothing ever is fully gone once you post it on the internet. And I did so sometime around 10, 11 years ago. And interestingly enough, politics was not on my list at all. I felt like that was something that I could flex with someone I was married to. Religion was absolutely essential to me. There was no way I was going to marry someone that wasn't a very committed Christian. But I feel like maybe people are elevating things, at least from where I stand, elevating things higher than what I think they should be, as far as their importance, and maybe deranking or not even considering things that I think have to be there, or they definitely would be on my list.
Okay.
Well, it's like you're tending a garden together, right? And you have to understand which sort of animals you can let in or need to clean. But you also need to know how to clean together, or how to cultivate the ground together to make it fertile. And there's also the space of going your own way in a sense, but also bringing it back always within the relationship. So there's like a dynamic of values that you need to practice together. And then there might be more rules that a person can set up, because there's often more wisdom behind there than you can notice on the surface.
All right, maybe we should transition into our questions and answers, and I think maybe the way they'll do this is I'll read the question and the panel can jump in on them, and we'll see if we can at least get through most of them. We've got about another hour to go. Phil PJ asks, how to speak of the ineffable? There are so many lackluster and questionable Christian books on marriage. There are so many reactionary recovery books in the post-purity I kissed dating goodbye variety. I have a meta question about how should we talk about talking about marriage, love, and sex. Is it possible to do this? Song of Songs speaks allegorically. Should we likewise speak only obliquely or symbolically of the ineffable experience? Mike Manson's Mystery of Marriage maybe comes the closest. RB's Sex God, that's Rob Bell's Sex God, also strong on this which is about that. But I wonder if anyone else has spoken directly to the meta question of what we talk about when we talk about marriage. Is preaching fundamentally the wrong medium, or are there brilliant examples of synesthesia? I think he's talking about synesthesic homilies, winsomely painting marriage and sex with compassion and urgency. Does everybody sort of understand the question?
There's a
Yeah,
lot.
I think I got it.
Yeah,
There's a lot there.
Well, I would say preachers should preach about marriage. It's a big theme in the Bible, and the Bible has quite a bit to say about what marriage is and what makes for a good one, and how you should choose somebody you're going to be married to, and whether you should be married at all, as Paul mentioned before about singleness. I think there's a lot to be preached on that's worth preaching about. That said, clearly there are good preachers, and there are great sermons, and then there are ones that are, mediocre. Just like there is in the world of books, as this person pointed out. I've read some pretty terrible marriage and dating advice books. Go ahead and skip the whole I kiss dating goodbye stuff, unless you're just fascinated by it for other reasons. But one that I recommended here when I first showed up on the Discord channel, it has terrible names. I don't even remember what the names are, but they're by Shanti Feldman and her husband. I thought that they were pretty good. And one that I thought was pretty good, but it's probably outdated at this point, was by Cloud and Townsend. It was Boundaries, but applied specifically to dating.
I think when I read Phil's question, he's basically, this is where I get into some of the Protestantism themes that I've been pulling out in my videos and tweets lately. A Protestant approach tends to be direct it tends to be physical. It tends to be secular in some ways. Whereas and part of what I see in Phil's question here is, I think in many ways the marriage, the imaginary, the presence of marriage in the public imaginary has been dramatically reshaped by cinematic arts, storytelling on television and in media, and insinuation. In some ways, like I've mentioned on this, I've watched a few series, I've watched a few series of The Bachelor and The Bachelorette now, and I gotta tell you, I almost need to wear a chin strap just to keep my mouth closed, because I'm just aghast at this program again and again and again, both the banality of it, but also the heights to which marriage has been elevated. And I don't think it's incidental that we're doing this at the same time that we're failing to actually practice it well. And so when I read Phil's question, his question is, can this thing actually be addressed directly in a very Protestantish way, or is it best to sort of be approached symbolically in an artistic way, which often tends better to grasp the ineffable rather than just sort of the direct secular, do this, don't do that, these are the rules?
Mm-hmm. Well, also
Yeah.
in regards to that, it's often if the book brings a question into it, I think it's always good to struggle with those questions. But then I also think one of the things I saw last time here, and I also gave them a compliment for it, they told their personal stories or personal stories of marriage of other people here on the Discord. And often in those, there's more to be found than any sort of trying to be on point marriage books you can find. Because it's in those stories of those people that you can find some beauty, some wisdom to move towards them or away from.
Yeah, I think that's really, really smart. That's extremely wise, Ferdy. I think the best marriage advice, conception, everything about learning about marriage is best observed by finding people who are married, who you can be in direct relationship with, and then be in direct relationship with them.
In just the latest episode of The Bachelor, which ended dramatically this week, not only in terms of the conflicts around race in our culture, but you had a man who was basically didn't propose to anyone, and then the woman that he kept around by giving her a rose at the end, he then on the final program dismissed because of this whole mess over a party that she went to a couple of years ago. Here you have a guy who basically, when it gets right to the end, says, I don't know if I can marry because my father hurt my mother and hurt me so deeply by fundamentally failing marriage that I don't know if I can do it. And then, even though the entire season is full of these dramatic words about almost the divinity of romantic love and how love conquers all and true love and all of this stuff, which is just, I mean, the entire series is just smeared with it. And at the same time, he's got this angst about, people bailing on it. I mean, the conclusion of the show is he bails on his, at least the woman who reached the hierarchy of the supposed process because of her, inability to do the work or deal with racism properly. It's just, to me, the entire season was a parable of the mess that our culture has found its way into.
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about it, and it sounded like, from what I've heard, I haven't seen it myself, but it sounds like a sacrifice for status.
Well, yeah, there's certainly that in that program. There's so much there, but
It's like the girl was sacrificed for his own status into the public eye, or at least his close circle.
it's
And that
always
was
hard to know when you're looking through, the lens of the television. But yeah,
well, I didn't even see it, but that was like the tone I got out of it.
That just sounds to me like I'm not going to marry someone who I found out is a flawed human being. It just like shouldn't it be the opposite? I've met the person who I can conquer everything that's wrong with them with them.
yeah,
Well, it would definitely be a solo life without friends.
Yeah, that's actually exactly right in my opinion, Jimmy. It's just there are some things I think that we should be upfront as much as we can be upfront about what those things. So you said, like, I'm going into this relationship thinking I'm going to find plenty of things that I find terrible, ugly, difficult, and we're going to conquer those things together. But there are maybe some things up front that I just think I just can't do that. Though that's too much for me. That's a bridge too far for me. And try to articulate what those things are so that we don't waste anyone's time. Let's move on to the next person that I think that it could work out with. So yeah, there's sometimes people who are not, I think, upfront enough about their deal breakers. And then there's people that don't want to see any ugliness at all and expect to find the perfect person who will have no flaws.
good luck.
The only thing I had to say about the question, and this might be the wrong answer, but if you can't talk about talking about marriage with somebody, I don't know how you could ever talk about marriage with them. And like, doesn't mean you have to agree on how to talk about marriage, but if you can understand, like, you can understand each other, I think that's in many ways a real huge advantage, because you got two different angles on it coming together if you can hear each other. But for me, like, if we can't even talk about it, then I don't know how we're gonna do it.
Yeah, and you kind of want to know what the person is proposing when asking for marriage, I guess, by the way they act and talk about things.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if there's a possible answer of yes on the other side to your proposition, like, it would be kind of nice to know that, instead of going for 2 years and then be like,
Yeah, actually, I was in a long-term relationship in my 20s for 6 years, and we had a house. We did too much. We remodeled the house, and then it came time where it was like, are we getting married or not? And I just hadn't really thought about it, and I just couldn't do it, because it was like, I don't know what it is. I don't know what the expectations are. It felt to me like this is just another item on your list, and I feel like we've crossed off a lot of items on your list, and I don't really want to do this. Something about it felt like this shouldn't be why you do this, and it kind of killed the relationship, but probably for the best. No ill will towards her or anything, but I think that was the sense I got. And had we been able to talk about what marriage is, it might have been the moment for me to get my act together.
All right, let's look at Phil's second question. Desire as weird parable. If marriage carries parabolic truth, what does it mean? Broad brush, Christ plus church. But in more detail, what is a diagram of this embodied covenant? And within that parable, what is desire? Is there an account of desire that offers a redemptive theology of paraphilia? If one can psychologize a foot fetish, self-identify as sapiosexual, or give a rational account of learnt, heritable patterning of an individual's preference in a partner, does this preference have a theological basis? Love is eros in marriage is eros in its partiality. And I wonder about how this idiosyncrasy should more speak of God. Should Christians be more romantically, sexually, elaboratively weird? Or is anything a high good for a Christian romantic relationship to be proactively vanilla? Well, there's a complex question. And just to, just to footnote it theologically a little bit, the marriage metaphors in Scripture, you can hardly find them to be higher. Ephesians 5, Paul likens our relationship to Christ in terms of Christ and his church. The same thing is done in the book of Revelation. Christ is the husband, the church is the bride. And so, yeah, that's... And in some ways, Protestantism picked up on this in the Reformation, in some ways pushing against what Charles Taylor called two-speed religion, of you sort of have super Christians up at the top and regular ordinary people, and so a lot of that gets treated in the Protestant Reformation. But I don't know, anybody on the panel want to take on this question? This is a tough one.
I don't even understand most of the words.
Yeah, too many. Yeah, especially as a Dutchman in an English-speaking conversation, it's got to be. I mean, I'm already really impressed, Ferdy, with your English, but and I've said that before. Sorry if that's offensive. Anyway, I feel like he started answering this question at the end. Like he started talking about Eros, and one thing that philosophers and theologians have pointed out again and again about Eros is that Eros has a telos, right? There's a direction, there's a purpose, there's a proper object of the desire that the desire should be aimed at. And you can look at this in lots of literature, like Milton's, actually Dante is what I'm thinking of. So Dante has this woman that he's, erotically attracted to, and eventually finds out that that's the kind of attraction that ultimately points him towards God as he goes on this journey through heaven and hell. And you've got Socrates talking about the true object of Eros in the Symposium. I mean, this is well-tread ground. I thought what was a little bit interesting about it is the reference to fetish. And maybe I think the idea in there, or at least this is my take on it, was that are we kind of taking a human person as a fetish? The human person is kind of like a foot of God in the analogy, right? So if you're fetishizing the foot instead of the person, you're somehow off, right? Or you're definitely off when it comes to sexual desire. So if we do that to a person and we have a person be the object of our Eros instead of God, are we kind of like the fetishist who focuses on the foot instead of the person? And I would say yes, but I don't think we're as far off as focusing on a foot, because a person is the image of God in a really super important sense. And so it's not, a person is not simply an object the way that a body part is. You have someone with a character, with an agency, with a will and desires of his or herself that you have to tangle with and be sensitive to, and contend with. And so in that way, I think you are rehearsing in an appropriate way the Eros that ultimately guides you to God.
Phil, yeah, go ahead, Val.
One is, I think the Bible can be boiled down to us being in right relationship with God and with each other. And I think the marriage is kind of being in right relationship with each other, even though we're imperfect beings. And then I had another thought, which I'm forgetting right now. But I think that's it. I can't remember what my second thought was.
Okay. Phil, you're in the room. I don't know if you can talk now. I don't know if you wanted to follow up on this or add anything to it or address it at all. Often people are in the room, but they're at work, so they can't talk. So, all right, there he is.
Hello, Paul. So Valerie invited me to the panel, and I've only just been able to join you. The difference is between, I think the question is, what's the difference between quite a vanilla, generic notion of desire, and then I find that there are people who have a very like just weird fixations, and I don't really have a theology of like what is it to like have peculiar fixations in the way that you desire certain things. Is that a pathology or is it redeemable? I don't know if that's making it any clearer.
Oh, okay.
But you've translated my questions, which are convoluted, very well. Thank you.
Well, I think Michael already answered it quite a bit. It's in how far the pathology is tainting the person itself, or then God, or that it's not doing that. I think there's some big gap in that, because if it suddenly becomes the overarching theme within the relationship in which it's built, it's probably becomes like a bad thing that's tainting the whole relationship. But we're all weird. We all have like little weird quirks that we need to integrate into the relationship, and they have their place. And I think you can see that with sexual acts as well. It's a very powerful thing, and it's very dangerous, but it can aim to the good. It can aim to more connection, but it can also become like something that's tainting the other person for you. So you often start seeing the person into, probably like an object or something. So the navigation of those things are very important, and you have to be careful and step slowly in some of the more dangerous parts. But like even in conversations, for example, you still have to navigate when to step in, when to step out.
All right, I think I'm going to flip down. Now, Phil had a third question, which I think I'm going to pass over for now, because there was a lot of upvoting on Sally's questions here, and I read them and I thought, oh yeah, these are very big here. Question number one, she has 3 questions. We'll see if we get to all of them. But question number 1, in a world where divorce is available, how do you stay committed in marriage and not get walked all over or just flat abused by the other spouse? Specifically, when eventually they learn that you value staying married more than they do. Should you just go for the divorce sooner shouldn't you just go for the divorce sooner than later in that case? How do you have any serious disagreements when divorce is on the table?
Wow.
Yeah.
Prisoner's dilemma, right?
That's right.
I mean, you guys familiar with Prisoner's dilemma? Should I give a little bit breakdown?
Yeah, break down a little bit.
Because it sounds like exactly the terms of the Prisoner's dilemma, right? So the Prisoner's dilemma is this philosophical test case where you're supposed to test all your intuitions about political theory and interpersonal, all these kinds of different things. So the setup is you and a conspirator are caught in a crime. They put you in isolated cells, and they tell you the first one of you to confess, gets off with a light sentence. And if neither of you confess, we still know that you did it, but you're going to get a worse sentence than if you confess individually, but you won't get the worst possible sentence, which is reserved for the person who doesn't confess first, right? So then play the game, right? So do you confess? Do you defect on your conspirator and get a lighter sentence? Or do you hold out for the Hail Mary that the two of you each will not either of you bail on the other, in which case they can't nail you as hard and you get the best possible outcome. So play the game. Do you trust your conspirator enough to not bail on you, in which case you get the best outcome for the two of you? Or do you take what you know that you can get under your own power and doesn't rely on the other person's cooperation?
I don't
I just
think
think
that
it's a terrible way to go into marriage. It's just a bad way to go into marriage.
But in marriage, I mean, marriage is a long time, and of course, all of this, you know, trust is the foundation of a marriage, and in the length of a marriage, there are many opportunities for trust to be betrayed, or at least appear like it's been betrayed, because one person's capacity for trust in many ways is dependent on how trustworthy the people in their life before had been. And in a world where people come into marriage having had parents divorce, having been abused, sometimes sexually abused as children, people are coming into divorce with real trust issues, as has become the cliche. And in the scope of a 30, 40, 50-year relationship, there are abundant times when either one fails the trust of the other, or one imagines that the other is not trustworthy. And in many ways, that's really what's at the heart of the prisoner's dilemma. So in terms of me as a pastor talking to people who are struggling in their marriage, this is right there.
This is a part of why I don't understand marriage outside of the church. I don't understand being married by a judge. I don't understand. It doesn't make any sense to me, because it's essential to marriage that it be under God and similar in faith. Because I hear that, and I'm like, my first thought is, it really sucks that in our society today, the consequences of your spouse being a traitor to the relationship are so high. But ultimately, I don't think there's any way out. That it kind of connects to the intimacy conversation. You are putting yourself at risk. There's no way out. It's part of it.
Yeah, you can only open yourself more within intimacy or any way in a relationship by having that trust.
I just tell my girlfriend, I'm not divorcing you. It won't happen. You can claim we're divorced. You can do whatever you got to do, but in my mind, we won't be divorced.
And then you're going to have to live it out.
Well, but I think there's also something to say that you already can get divorced within the relationship and within marriage. And I think that's already the point that you really need to start tackling first, because you're disconnecting from each other. You're divorcing. So how can when that happens, it quickly can go into like a quick, running down from the mountain. So how do you stop that then? Or there might be a point that you need to let it die. But how can you make sure you do your best to stop the divorce from happening and climb back the mountain up again to aim for something beautiful?
All right.
I think there's a couple of thoughts I had. One is someone once said that love will end in betrayal or death, or usually both. And so it sounds like a question of like someone wrestling with their faith, with doubts, and it sounds like for some people who wrestle with it, they come out okay, but some people have to judge where to draw the line in the sand and where to show mercy and continue on, and that's a hard call. And I feel for her if this is a personal question. I do know a couple married people that wrestle with the question honestly, and I remember one couple who thought he was going to be married, and then his wife ended up divorcing him. And so I don't know. That's but those are my thoughts. Thanks.
My answer. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I almost can't let my brain stew on that too much, because I get to it'll be a downward spiral for me, and I'll just find a million reasons why, and I'll become really fatalistic. So I just go, no. The answer to this is faith. I have faith that I can tell, that I can be trustworthy, and I can tell if someone else is trustworthy, and that if and when they betray me, which they probably will multiple times, that we'll be able to overcome that.
My answer to this is usually you cannot. So when you stand on that, when you stand before God and witnesses, you promise to love. You can't enforce that the other one will do it. You probably can't even assume that you will do it very well or perfectly. But the decision is always to love the other, and at some point one might have to. There's not a lot of difference in terms of loving another and getting walked on to a degree. There is a question of whether it is actually loving to another to allow yourself to be walked on. In other words, there's a lot of layers to this, and it is not a license to be abused. But what you really make is the decision to love. And so what you say to the other person is, I will love you, period. And that means if you stop loving me, if you don't treat me as love requires you to treat me, I will continue to love you. And again, that doesn't mean that the marriage will last. It doesn't mean that divorce won't happen. It doesn't mean any of those things, because love is what love requires is a tremendous thing that can look very different in different circumstances. But that's the foundation. That's the foundation of marriage, and this is exactly what Ephesians 5 says. And then what you wind up with then are instances of asking, what does love require of me now? And in the context of a marriage, when things get difficult, that will require wise counsel from others in figuring out what the next steps of love really are. In other words, the question is not really divorce. The question is, what does love look like in all of these different circumstances? And what that does as a Christian is what you are thrown back on when you get into difficult situations and relationships where it's tremendously difficult to love the other, often because the other is not behaving as they should, let's say, in one way or another. You very quickly realize that your resources and your capacity for love is limited, and that's when you really lean into God and say, look, my capacity to love this other person is limited. My best example of this is the conclusion of Corrie ten Boom's great memoir, The Hiding Place, when she has been going around Europe giving these evangelistic talks about, how on earth are the Dutch and the Europeans going to forgive the Nazis? And so she's giving all of these talks about Christ's power to forgive and redemption, and Europe is eating this up because that's the only way out of their box of hurt, which is forgiveness. And then she is confronted by one of the Nazi prison guards that she saw abusing and basically killing her sister. Corrie ten Boom was single, and her deepest relationship was really with her family and her sister, her beloved sister, who in Corrie's mind was a far greater saint than she was. And she saw this one prison guard who, would leer and mock as he would force the female prisoners to disrobe, and all of this. And then Corrie, after preaching this sermon, the prison guard comes up to her and says, "Oh, Fraulein, I just loved how you spoke about the power of Jesus to forgive our sins." And she's confronted with, does that require me to forgive you? And it's if you've never read the book, read the book and read it all the way through, because that part of the book always brings me to tears, because she basically says, I cannot forgive this man. And so at that moment she prays, she says, I need Christ's power to love, to forgive this man, because I do not have those resources. And just read the book. That's every marriage hopefully won't go to those extremes, but that is what we're talking about: the decision and the power to love. And
Well,
go ahead.
I just want to add up on that. I think it's also a commitment to seek love for yourself within the relationship as well. Getting the darkest parts of yourself and find appreciation and forgiveness for those, so you can be yourself within the relationship.
Yeah,
and often they go hand to hand, because when you find some love for the other person, you will find some love for yourself at the same time.
Yeah, it's a tricky business. All right, let's go to number 2 of Sally's questions, because they're just great questions. Regarding sex and power, Sally just keeps doesn't let us off easy here. Since the invention of video games and endless available cartoon porn, the idea that women have all the power in a relationship because of sex control is absurd and useless. I think sex in married couples is grotesquely misrepresented. I think many people go through years of marriage without sex and just don't talk about it. Also, the extent to which sex may not even be pleasant when you are having it wildly under discussed. Or you got to read that sentence properly. It may not even be liked by either party. It may be procreation sex only. Then it may not even be that. Great, another great question by Sally. And I think, even this question alone would be something that deserves its own treatment, because the complexity of married sexuality is huge. So, panel, what are your thoughts? Question number 2 from Sally.
The question of women's power from sex is, I think, really important, because I think that we're really doing a disservice to women into what their power actually is, and it's almost like a hyper identification with that specific power, and a complete unawareness of the real power of women, especially in relationships, because it's not sex. The only power you have over men with sex it's real, but that's got nothing to do with a real relationship.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we also had a question before somewhere about stopping to watch porn, and I think that's quite interesting to connect with this one, because for me it went quite naturally to just suddenly stop watching porn. But I guess there's an understanding suddenly of seeing disgust in it, and then a sort of love for people in general. So it becomes then, how do you say that? It becomes then suddenly something to steer away from what you do naturally, because you don't want to taint it. You don't want to make it something ugly. And that's the thing, I think, also with sexual intimacy. There's a lot of beauty to be found in there. There's a lot of ways that you can connect more to each other through such act. And I think you can say that over a plural of different things outside of it as well. Working together on a project. Like if you do that earnestly and honestly, you probably get connected a lot more than if you just see it for a paycheck. And I have no clue where I was going anymore with this.
I would say, I think Sally probably underestimates how much sexual power women still have in spite of pornography. I mean, one of the big trends in pornography right now is the OnlyFans stuff, and a big reason why it's a big trend and why it hooks so many guys is that it further offers the illusion of a relationship that's more than simply the physical, right? Just the pictures, but it's the ability of the sex performer to give a personal touch, or more in the direction of an illusion of a relationship than it is simply the disembodied, or simply the body without the person aspect of that pornography still ultimately is anyway. But yeah, I mean, it's not that pornography has no effect; it has a huge effect. Pornography is hugely affecting guys in this culture as it now stands, and that is robbing women of some of their power through sex. But I think it's an underestimation of still how powerful women are with regard to sex, in the way that she framed the question. And she had a lot more, but that was just one thing I wanted to address.
The issue of sexual frustration, unhappiness, sexless marriages is a huge issue. I remember talking to one, he was actually a pastor, who told me at that point it had been 17 years since he and his wife had sexual relations. And that this is, therapists know this because, but it's not something that's talked about publicly much. And the different dynamics of sex inside versus outside marriage. Tim Keller actually talks about it quite a bit, and it's another whole huge topic. I'm going to go on to question number 3 because we've got way more questions than we have time. Financial intimacy is wrecked because women do not need anyone to support them? Question mark, exclamation point. But when you have an infant, you absolutely do. You are as vulnerable as said infant. Guys fantasize about that they could be the one staying home. This is not useful to tell your baby mama. Guys, when you have infants and are not getting up all night so they can suck nourishment out of your chest, don't say, I'd love to stay home, and be bitter about supporting your family. Staying home is wiping poop off someone actively fighting you. Staying home, I love Sally. Staying home is panicking the baby is dead 200 times because it's sleeping too well. Staying home is relinquishing all financial security and autonomy. All this said, I'm very pro long-term marriage on my second and want it to work. And number 4, computer games are crack cocaine, and I hate them.
Ice cream. I agree. It's ice cream. It can be ice cream most of the time.
So, any comments or responses to Sally's question number 3?
I think I know that there are these guys who sort of fantasize about being stay at home. I don't know them. I don't think. I guess my experience is they're not as common. To bring back up OnlyFans, I think a big part of why that's popular is it's simulated providing. I think guys want to feel like they're providing. They're getting both the sexual gratification because of how she looks and how she presents herself, and the providing aspect by paying for it to a specific person.
That's fascinating. That's a great idea.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I hadn't even thought of that. Having 5 kids, I know my wife would have been saying yes on that. I'm not sure if that was really a statement, Sally, or a little mini sermonette out of born frustration. So my wife would very much endorse that question number 3 you just had.
And I think everybody staying at home for the last year has been fed up with it and want to get out. So, but I think financial intimacy is still very big often in relationships, especially I guess in this more secular world, because it's often more transactional.
Yeah.
So it's like often there's the battle. It's like what do you bring in financially, and what do I bring in financially?
Yeah.
And it's a difficult topic to talk about, but that might be just the Dutch. We don't like to talk about. Well, we like to talk about everything, but at the same time, sometimes not too much.
No,
it's
that's
true. He's right.
I've had so many conversations with younger guys, my age and younger, and their criticisms of relationships all come down to transactional things.
Wow.
And it's just like, so you don't want a relationship. You want a financial relationship. You want equal. And there's no such thing, first of all. And then you're going to get, it's so frustrating to me because it's I don't mean this to sound pejorative, but it sometimes feels like modern society is mildly autistic. Like there, yeah, I mean, I'm including myself in that, but like, shouldn't the relationship's finances be about the relationship's finances? I don't know how to make it any more clear than that. Like, if we have children, we have to pay for children. We have to take care of children. So what do we need to do for that? And how can each of us help with that? Shouldn't that just be the question? I don't know why it has to be more than that.
Because the personal is political.
Mm-hmm. All right.
I mean, I don't mean that flippantly. Yeah, I mean, it's really a big problem is that we import our politics into our personal relationships, and we export our personal relationships into our politics, and it's become really, really difficult to make that separation.
Well, I would even go further and call it just like a status game. And then you have that commodity game of, well, I can get something better now, so I'm stepping out of this one and try the next one.
But you are getting something better. You're getting a relationship that you can't have alone. I don't know. This topic actually triggers me. I've had the conversation so many times, and I've seen so many good, healthy, seemingly good, healthy relationships just destroyed because that just somebody couldn't get over that hump, and I find it really hard to understand.
All right,
it is the number one reason. Oh, sorry, Paul. Go ahead.
No, I gotta keep it moving because I want to get some other things in. DZ asked about or mentioned the anima, and James Frazee. James was in our Monday conversation, and James not only did a whole, has a PhD and teaches this stuff, but he also worked with a lot of Jungian stuff. So James knows a lot about Jung. So he answered that in the questions for the panel text chat room here. But I want to get to Jeff G's because I know he was in the YouTube chat and really wanted to get this question. But before that, we've got Susan, the original Protestant. Wow, Susan. I would like to pick up on Joey's point that you cannot push or bully young people into valuing marriage in a culture which makes youth from 21 to 41 the only attractive stage of life. That was kind of both Joey and Catherine made that point in the Monday conversation. I happen to know many, including myself, who have had the joy of a long-term wonderful marriage. You don't sell cars by posing a person of my age beside the car. How can we communicate the value of lifelong together in which spouses grow in wisdom, kindness, and joy with each other when the actual physical appearance of the people is not culturally validated as something anyone would want? Wow, that's a powerful point. When Joey said moms and kids on Instagram, this makes sense. Beautiful women, cute kids. Cassidy, other filmmakers, how can we communicate this? How can we show that there is a great life at gasp 40? Yesterday my wife and I drove to, because I have a work day here at Living Stones. If anybody wants to work at Living Stones this Saturday, come on down. We'll give you something to do. Wear a mask. But so my wife and I took my day off yesterday because it was my son's birthday. He's in Santa Cruz. And my wife and I bought a birthday cake for him and drove all the way down to Santa Cruz just so we could sort of stand out in the rain and wish him happy birthday and have a little short conversation with him and, give him a hug. And then we, drove back home. It's about a 3-hour drive. And both of us just sat in the car amazed at the richness of marriage, long-term marriage, and and having children. So costly, sometimes so painful, so difficult, but yet so meaningful and so fulfilling. And yeah, you'd have to be one heck of a movie director to put that into a movie. If you did, it would, I think it would sell like mad. But great comment, Susan. Any comments from the panel on this?
Well, I just want to ask the question, and Paul or Michael, like, what is so beautiful about your marriage?
Well, I mean, one thing that's beautiful about my marriage is my wife. So she's approaching 40, and I still think she's hot stuff. And I think this ties into a little bit of what I already commented on with Sally's question was, I think still sometimes women underestimate how much men find them attractive. And I think part of this is this issue of comparison. So yes, there are women that are more beautiful in a very superficial way than others, but I find a lot of women beautiful and sexually attractive on a surface level. And it's a quite wide range of women, and many women that are older. And I think it's possible that women kind of project the way that their sexual desire operates onto the way men are. Like men are very simple creatures, and our sexual desire is actually activated pretty easily. And that said, I think my wife is like part of the cream of the crop, and I don't think that while it may diminish over time in the kind of like physical immediate appeal for both of us, I don't think it goes away as fast as maybe sometimes our cultural messaging puts out.
Go ahead,
more with beauty. I mean more with beauty, like, the whole parts relationships. Like, how does it bring you goodness? How does it bring you truth?
So I've been married. My wife and I were married in '88, and so this year we will be married 33 years. And in that 33 years, there have been, whenever someone in church says we're celebrating our 45th wedding anniversary, there's raucous applause in our little congregation, because many people in this church have been married for decades, and it's an accomplishment to be married for a long time. It is a meaningful endeavor, because sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard, but the value in it is really difficult. It's idiosyncratic. Every marriage is different, I would imagine. Sometimes you find this as a pastor too. Sometimes, let's say someone is married almost 50 or over 50 years, and then their spouse dies, and you would expect the spouse to be, broken. Oh, I've lost the love of my life. We were married 50 years. Sometimes they're just like, oh, I'm glad that's over. And you kind of like, wait a minute. But at the same time, they wouldn't divorce, and that would be unthinkable, and not necessarily in an unhealthy way. Marriage, there was a great line in one of it was a Netflix series on finding serial killers. And one of the cops said to the other, marriage is part love affair, part small business. And that's true, because there's just so many different aspects to it that you don't it's very hard to articulate just why it's so profound and meaningful, even if it isn't perfect. And especially when you've had the joint experience of raising children together. Now all of my children are, well, almost one of them just graduated into his 30s, but you look at these children, and we have 20 years of investment, 20 plus years of investment in each one of them. And so when they accomplish something, it's on this little team of two, which is probably the most meaningful thing you can imagine. So it's nothing that is easily described in quickly or simply. It probably has to be described in story form, and it's very, very difficult.
And that's why also I like those stories being told on the Discord before, being shared about grandparents and their own relationships.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about my father. Like when I was younger, I would be really frustrated with my father because he just went with things, like in the best possible way, and I would get irritated, like stand up for yourself. And as I got older, I realized the wisdom in it. And then I looked at my father's life, and when I was a kid, he was a super athlete, the definition of youth. And then he broke his back shoveling our driveway. He had shoulder problems. And I'm sure there was pain associated with that, with the certain things not being available to him anymore. But he just sort of aged and became a wise figure in my life. And I find myself going to him for advice or going over there to help out with things. And it's just, I don't think of age that way. I mean, I have my struggles with it where I think, oh man, it sucks that I can't do what this year what I was able to do last year with my body, and how that's only going to continue. But I see my father and everything he has, and I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's something nice about that. If I have my own kids, I can do that for them.
Yeah, and I want it in my 20s instead of in my 40s.
It's,
Yeah.
and again, as we pulled away from dropping the cake off at my son's place over in Santa Cruz, my wife and I, we both have tears in our eyes, and there's a knowing, there's a community and a certain kind of knowing that we have earned over 30 plus years of marriage and of parenting. And we started this conversation talking about intimacy. It's a deep, deep intimacy that can only be had in the midst of time, in the midst of just the extremities of life. And, sometimes soldiers will have that in war because they've passed through a battle, and only that little band of brothers knows, that's the conocer in Spanish, knows what they know. And so, with all of the ups and downs and joys and sorrows of our marriage and raising 5 children, my wife and I have a community of two that has a special knowledge that no one else in the world can know, and we share that. That's a powerful thing. And it is, I think about Andy Crouch in a lot of his recent books about technology, talks about the fact that if you want to, we now have abundant recordings accessible instantly to us of the best piano playing in the world. And that's really cool. Piano music is lovely. You know what's even better? To be able to play the piano with excellence. What does that require of you? Well, it requires a world of mundane. It requires hours of practice. What I loved about Sherry's second question about, or third question, about being a mom. What does raising a child require of you? It requires everything. It's so mundane so often. And I love what you said, Jimmy. Your father learned what it takes to raise a family. And here, this incredible athlete, his life was broken for you. And, there's the Christian story. And that's why marriage is so much identified with Christ. Your life will be broken for your partner. And if it's a good marriage, their life will be broken for you, and you will have a level of intimacy and mutual knowledge that no one else will have because it's yours. And that's a deeply powerful thing.
I was thinking there's like at least a few goods that I can think of within marriage that are probably the best place to get them, as in the best place to get them are within the context of a loving marriage. One obvious one would be sex. I think sex is best had within marriage, despite the difficulties and the sexless marriages that are out there. I mean, there are some objective statistics out there that show that married people, generally speaking, have more sex than people who are not married, which is completely baffling and backwards to our cultural messages. So that's one thing. The other is, as Paul's been talking about, intimacy. I don't think you're going to find intimacy many other places outside of marriage in the same way that you're going to find it within marriage. Another is child raising, having children. Best place to raise children is within a committed relationship of marriage. And the other is character building. It's going to push you to become a better person out of necessity in a way that many other things in the world just won't.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think it's paying attention to all those things. And I would say it's not just the love for the other, but the love for the us. And then on this question, I would say the Instagram doesn't make sense because it's a fake selling of something. It's these true stories that are really resonating. And we saw that with Peterson as well, right? It's like trying to translate true stories with the suffering included. That is resonating with people. That's really like ringing true and starts them moving forward to something. And he didn't even point to the most beautiful thing that's possible. Just pointed like how to enact in suffering. Get out of there.
Well, I want to quick hit Falcon Dark's question. I noticed that Jeff G's question was on another topic, and Jared advised him to throw it over into the regular questions for PVK channel. Actually, next week we're going to talk about this topic again, so it'll be 2 weeks from now, but your question will still sit there, so it should be fine. Falcon Dark said, how to set marriage as a goal and pursue it without your prospective dating partners becoming a means to an end, or in other words, without sacrificing them to the idol of Babylon. I'll just give a quick comment on that and then give it to the panelists. We never escape doing that to one degree or another. But in sort of the three common Greek words that gets translated love, eros, which is the desire to consume, as John Vervaeke says, to possess, phileos, which is sort of a shoulder-to-shoulder love, and agape, which is self-donating love. In the process, and I love what Michael just said about some of these goods that marriage reliably affords. These you will in the process of moving towards marriage. Well, there'll be a lot of eros at the beginning, and then phileo, the shoulder to shoulder. So when my wife and I drive away and leave my son in Santa Cruz with a birthday cake we bought him, that's shoulder to shoulder, and so it's together. And then agape, well, that's the agapic love is what marriage requires for the long term. So I'd say that it's inevitable at first you look at someone and think, when you find someone, it's like, oh, I want this person. I want to be with them forever. That's deeply erotic, which is absolutely appropriate. But then that's sort of the entryway into the other, costlier, deeper, longitudinal loves that are available within marriage. So, all right, so there's panelists on this last question.
I'll go because I'm not married. But for me, you got me thinking about with the agape thing. But the shoulder to shoulder one, for me, I just think of it in terms of come what may. Like that's what I'm looking for, is somebody who's simultaneously with me saying come what may. And that way, any goals I do have, which I can't avoid, it factors in that they may never come to fruition. On the agape side, I think the closest I can come to it is like my girlfriend will say that some actress or somebody's really attractive, and I'll be like, eh. And I'm not saying that. I'm not lying. I mean it, and it's because it's like, well, you're showing me an image of a person. It's not, there's nothing there. That's them, and that is so much higher to me now that I can't really compare her to anybody else.
I guess I get the point and the concern of kind of taking advantage of someone or treating them too much like an object or too much like I don't know, someone you're in a capitalistic exchange with. But I think since we live in a capitalist society, we kind of know what counts as mistreating someone in those contexts and what doesn't. And when you're approaching someone to talk about marriage and you're beginning the dating process, you know, like it's perfectly appropriate in my mind to talk through what it is that you're hoping for and wanting with that other person. And you're not taking advantage of someone by stating those things and putting them out on the table. I guess what you would be doing at taking advantage of things would be to continue getting the benefits of having that person around, especially if you're leading with sex in this culture, when you don't really have any intention of following through. That'd be where I would see most of the mistreatment, not on the fact that you're saying that we want to be married, but maybe I'm misreading the question.
No, I think you're right, because both people are saying, I'd like to get married. How about you? Mm-hmm. Oh, how about you? And so initially it's sort of a broker thing. And so I think you're right, Michael. I think you're very right on that.
Well, and I think also then the idol of Babylon, for example, it's like the status, right? It's like showing then your girl or your man to the public, and if that's, appreciated and upheld, then you're like to stick around with that person. But I think you need to put the goal beyond marriage. It is to become human. And marriage is a very powerful tool for that. And you need to look at an us and not like a me or a her.
Yeah, I guess I missed the idol of Babylon piece. I didn't fully process what that was meaning. Yeah, well, I mean, you don't simply want a trophy wife, or hopefully you don't. And you don't simply want to be with someone who's high status, but that's part of the attraction. That's part of the eros. And I guess I can return to what Paul's initial response was, is like, it's perfectly appropriate for eros to be the operating kind of love at initial point, at starting at go. But you want to.
I still think later as well. But
yeah, well, yeah, you never. Yeah, hopefully your marriage relationship is never less than an erotic one, at least for not very long. But you're hoping that you're coming in as the kind of person who has capacity for agape, and you're looking for somebody who also likewise has that same capacity.
Yeah.
All right. Any closing comments from our panelists?
Way too short.
You gave me confidence because you said that I know marriage more than I think, but I do think the distinction holds. I don't know marriage from experience.
Yeah.
And what I do know is close to it didn't go well.
Yeah. Any
I think you're already participating in it, Jimmy. You're already participating sincerely in it. So you're already discovering loads of it before getting wet. But that's my opinion.
Yeah, I would give you further encouragement, Jimmy. I think you're there, and you're about as far along as you could expect it to be, not having already jumped into it.
All right, then my plans are correct.
Proceed.
We'll see that with time.
That's right. Valerie, any closing comments here? You were quite instrumental in bringing this whole thing together.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I gleaned a lot from it. So I appreciate being involved and having a hand in putting it together. So thanks, everybody.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thanks for setting it up, Valerie.
Yeah, thanks for organizing.
All right, so next week we are going to do, I think, more question and answer. I'm not exactly sure. I know Valerie's been talking to some others about what we'll do next week. So next week we'll also be on this subject. I do plan to make this a series. I have a lot of ideas because I think this is actually after I put my video out on Monday, I received a note from a pastor friend of mine who was pastoring for a long time in central Toronto, and he sent me a note and he said, this is such a needed discussion right now, and the church is really struggling with this. And so this is something that we're going to keep coming back to and talking about. And again, part of the reason I do this in conjunction with the Discord server is because this affords, when I listen to the wisdom of the panelists today and the wisdom of the other panelists on my video, and we'll have more and more voices coming in. These subjects are too large and there's too much to be known about it that I certainly don't know everything. And so it requires a community to address it and to talk about it and to open up the different aspects. And so I appreciate this communal way of going about it. The administrators here at the Bridges of Meaning Discord server have set up a section on the server to deal with this now and to discuss it, and that's where we're at today. It's called the Marriage Crisis Special Section, and so people can leave text chats in there. There are a variety of voice chat and video chat rooms here at the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, and so after we break up right now, you can proceed to other smaller rooms to continue the conversation there if that's what you're interested in. And I think that's this afternoon. I'm recording another conversation with Brett Sockold and Cale Zeldin about actually we're going to talk about Christian education. That'll probably come out on the channel Monday. So thank you all for coming this morning. And if there's nothing we need to address, I'll say, Rick, you can end transmission.